Right now, somewhere in your life, you are holding on to something you should let go of. Not because it's valuable, not because it makes you happy, but because the thought of losing it hurts more than the thought of gaining something better. And the disturbing part isn't that you're doing it, it's that you don't know you're doing it. Your brain has been running this math in the dark for decades, and it has never once shown you the receipts. There is a glitch in your brain. It is not subtle. It is not rare. It is a systematic, predictable, mathematically proven distortion in how you value everything: money, relationships, time, identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are. And you've never heard of it because your brain is the one hiding it from you. In 1979, two psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, published a paper that would eventually win a Nobel Prize. They called it prospect theory, and at the center of it was a finding so simple it sounds obvious, until you realize it explains almost every bad decision you've ever made. Losing something hurts roughly twice as much as gaining the same thing feels good. Twice. Not a little more. Not psychologically, you kind of prefer not to lose. No. The pain of loss is weighted at roughly double the pleasure of an equivalent gain. And this is not a metaphor. It is a function, a curve, a measurable, predictable asymmetry in how your brain processes the world. Here's the mechanism behind it. Inside your brain, there is a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. It is your threat detector. It is ancient. It was there long before you had language, long before you had a sense of self. And when you face a potential loss, your amygdala lights up like a fire alarm. But here's what's genuinely unsettling. When you face an equivalent gain, the response is weaker, measurably weaker. Your amygdala screams about losses. It merely nods at gains. And in 2010, a group of researchers at University College London found a way to prove this wasn't just correlation. They studied two patients with a rare genetic condition called Urbach-Wiethe disease. These patients had something in common. Their amygdalae were damaged, destroyed. When these patients were asked to make the same gambling decisions as everyone else, something strange happened. They didn't fear losses more than they valued gains. The asymmetry vanished. Without the amygdala screaming in their heads, losing $50 felt exactly as significant as gaining $50. So sit with this for a second. If removing one small part of your brain eliminates your fear of loss, then loss aversion is not a philosophy. It's not a personality trait. It's not something you can argue yourself out of with logic. It is a physical structure in your skull, firing right now, shaping every choice you make, and you cannot hear it. But the amygdala is only half the story. There's another experiment you need to understand. In 1990, Kahneman and his colleagues walked into a classroom at Cornell University. They gave half the students a coffee mug, a plain, ordinary coffee mug, worth maybe $6. The other half got nothing. Then they asked a simple question. To the students who got the mug, what's the lowest price you'd sell it for? To the students who didn't, what's the most you'd pay to buy it? Same mug, same classroom, same 5 minutes. The students who owned the mug demanded, on average, $7.12 to part with it. The students who didn't were willing to pay, on average, $2.87. The mere fact of ownership, for 5 minutes, with a free mug, nearly tripled its perceived value. This is called the endowment effect, and it is a direct consequence of loss aversion. Once something is yours, losing it becomes coded as a threat. Your amygdala takes custody of a coffee mug it didn't care about 5 minutes ago. And here's where the whole thing turns over on you. This distortion does not stay in the laboratory. It doesn't politely confine itself to coffee mugs and hypothetical gambles. It bleeds into everything. It's why you can't sell the stock that's been tanking for 6 months. Selling it would mean admitting the loss is real. As long as you hold, the loss is theoretical. Your brain would rather live with a theoretical loss than a confirmed one. It's why you stay in relationships that have been over for years. You're not staying for love, you're staying because leaving means losing the time you already invested. And your brain weights that loss at double. It's why you won't quit the career you quietly despise, the salary you know, the title you earned, the identity you built. Losing any of it registers as a threat. Even if what's on the other side is objectively better, the loss looms larger. It's why you defend opinions you stopped believing years ago. Changing your mind means losing a piece of your identity. It means admitting you were wrong. And your brain would rather be consistently wrong than lose the story it's been telling itself. So the real question isn't whether loss aversion exists. It's why, though. Why would a brain, the most sophisticated information processor in the known universe, be designed with such a glaring, systematic flaw? The answer is not in the laboratory. It's about 200,000 years behind you. For the vast majority of human history, losses were not inconveniences. They were existential. You didn't lose a promotion. You lost access to food. You didn't lose a relationship. You lost your place in the tribe, which meant you lost protection, which meant you died. In that world, a brain that treated losses and gains equally was a brain that got deleted from the gene pool. The brains that survived were the ones that overreacted to losses, the ones that screamed at the slightest sign of threat, the ones that would rather miss an opportunity than risk a catastrophe. You are running that brain right now. In a world of stock portfolios and career changes and difficult conversations, a world where losses are rarely fatal, but your amygdala cannot tell the difference. And this is the part no one tells you. Loss aversion is not a flaw in your thinking. It is a feature of your hardware. It kept your ancestors alive through famines and winters and tribal wars. It is the reason you exist. But it is also the reason you cannot let go. So what do you do with this? If the distortion is physical, if the amygdala fires before you're even conscious of the choice, if you cannot think your way out of a structure in your skull, what's left? You do the one thing your amygdala cannot prevent. You notice. You notice when you're holding a stock, not because you believe in it, but because you can't stomach confirming the loss. You notice when you're defending a position, not because it's true, but because changing it feels like losing a piece of yourself. You notice when you're staying somewhere, not because it's good, but because leaving hurts more than staying is worth. The amygdala will fire. It will always fire. That half-second warning, the same half-second from Liebert's experiment, that is all you get. Your brain decides. Then you become aware. Then you get a choice. Not a choice to stop the feeling. A choice to notice it. To name it. To say, this is not a rational assessment of value. This is a 200,000-year-old threat detector responding to a coffee mug, to a stock ticker, to a conversation you're afraid to have. Your amygdala doesn't know you live in a world where losses are survivable. It still thinks every loss might be the last one. It is doing its job. It has always been doing its job. But now at least, you know it's there. You know the math it's running. You know that the pain you feel at the thought of losing something is not evidence that the thing is valuable. It is evidence that your brain was built for a world that no longer exists. And that gap between what your amygdala screams and what is actually true, that gap is the only freedom you really have. New videos drop every week. Keep asking.